I'm Tim Baird and just attending my first DevOps Talks conference. It's been a great event so far, and particularly looking at how we put cultural change into DevOps. The cultural change for me is key because I'm looking to apply it in my organisation. One of the other benefits of the conference has been to get my hands on the DevOps Handbook by John Willis, signed copy no less. So it's I'm looking forward to the next day and a half, and yeah, hoping to take away some excellent tips on applying DevOps. I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. Yeah, no offense to you, don't waste your time. Here's why, because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you wanna do. Bring me down, can't nothing. Bring me down, my level's too high. Bring me down, can't nothing.
Wants to learn karate, so he goes to this dude, and the dude doesn't actually spar with him. They pound nails and they wax cars. Wax on, wax off, right? How does this map? Well, essentially what we did is, hey, if that was all ad hoc, what if we constructed a syllabus of all the things that our graduate could actually take on and learn by himself? And it kind of worked and didn't in like a couple of interesting ways. Because when we constructed the syllabus, we made it so that everything was modular and separated, like Trello cards, essentially. And it was focused on the fundamentals that we missed the first time around. But this was good. This was repeatable. We can assign this to schedules. So if I'm having a busy week, that means I can split up some cards and then give it to him, and then he could drive himself and figure out how to work a certain system. It can be self-driven. But what ended up happening was that the graduate that we had very, very little experiential knowledge. So it was a very telling moment, for example, when he came out of the program and I tried to get him to delete a whole document in VI, and then he couldn't do it because he didn't get that experience. The click moment also takes a while. So if you can remember the movie, there's a part in it where Daniel actually gets frustrated because he doesn't understand what the wax on, wax off thing is about until way, way later on. And the last part is highly, highly important. He got sort of like learning fatigue because while the rest of the team was laying cards and actually getting stuff done, he was there by himself learning. And at the end of the day, he didn't have any output. He didn't have any artifacts to show how far he went. And so we tried again with a third one, which I like to call the Rocky Balboa model. Now, surely we've all seen Rocky, right? Survivor, fantastic, awesome. Okay, so for those people who don't know, essentially in Rocky, there's a guy who wants to make it to the ring, go the distance. So he has this goal in his mind. So what he does is he runs up steps and he punches meat or beef, essentially. And he watches himself get better throughout the process. And when we were constructing this, we had a couple of constraints at the very, very beginning. That this is the starting statement that we will begin with. That we are going to build something, and we are going to provide you with the knowledge you need to do that. It's modular. It has to still be modularized because that's super sweet. But the final part is that it has to be anchored by an end goal or an artifact. Because in the movie, Rocky Balboa actually has his mind on winning that title. And that was really, really important. What do I mean, though, when I talk about artifacts? It's either a thing that you could take home and improve. Maybe it's like a software project that you could work on your spare time. Or maybe at the end of the process, you have a skill that you can demonstrate. Maybe you're a little bit better at JQ by the end of the week. You know? Or maybe it's a person that you could be. So the last part is interesting because we did this by having the graduates try to write the job description for the job they'd like to have at the end of this. And then we mapped all the tasks accordingly. And as far as artifacts go, we started with a sort of like kata. And the kata's point was for it to have the same output every single time while we expand on concepts. And in this case, it started with an EC2 instance that basically deployed a WordPress blog that posted cat photos. And then we fronted with an ELB, so you start talking about like networking, port forwarding, and all that stuff. Then you wrap it with an auto-scaling group, so you start talking about, okay, cool, everything has to be immutable, infrastructure as code, all that fun bits. You separate out the database, and this is a conversation about state. Then you wrap it with a VPC, so you talk about networking security, and then you split it into subnets. Afterwards, you talk about all the bits that a lot of people forget to talk about, NAT gateways, internet gateways, and how important they are to an actual infrastructure. And by the time you get to the very end with a CloudFront distribution, they have the knowledge of how the service affects or how the consumer interacts with the service and how they can make it better. Now, what else does a good story need? A really good story, all the good stories that are made have good character growth. You can see the delta from the beginning to the very end of the change in the character. So you need a moment of proving, right? So with a lot of good movies, you almost have like a boss fight where the protagonist kind of like gets to display or gets challenged about everything that he actually learned all throughout the process. So how do we do that? How do you do that with operational stuff? Well, we did it by having the graduate explain or reason with a system, and the system was that same catalog for that graduate to actually be able to like articulate what it has. So this is the first slide. This was at the beginning of the exercise. If you can't see it very well, there's a green box there that says routing. So from the computer, it magically goes to like Amazon through a magic routing box. By the second sort of like session that we had the week after, she was able to articulate what DNS or how DNS traffic arrives, but still no AWS. And by the third part, she's able to articulate how to keep artifacts or how you monitor services and how you scale groups. Now, this is the best of both worlds for us from the first two approaches because it also provides the fastest understanding of how things tie together. Again, I'd like to go back to the beginning of the talk where we delineated that I just wanted someone to argue with. And you don't want to argue with someone who just has a lexical knowledge of all the commands in the system. You want that complete kind of understanding of how things tie together. It's still structured, but the last part is that it provides a clear delineation of growth, which is highly, highly important. Now, this takes the longest time to prepare because you have to take all those things into consideration. It doesn't take much in the way of tech. All it needs is a couple of whiteboard markers and an empty Git repo, really. But there's a twist ending here. And this is actually the point of the talk because we've all seen Kung Fu Panda, right? No? No? Oh my gosh. So in Kung Fu Panda, there's this panda, he wants to learn Kung Fu, he gets taught by rat. And a lot of people actually think that the story is about Po, the big panda, but you know, it's a decent opinion, but it's wrong. It's a story about Shifu, and why it's a story about Shifu is from the beginning of like the story to the end of the story, Shifu is actually the one who has the biggest delta as far as character change goes. He starts out cantankerous and angry all the time, but by the end of it, he has a degree of empathy to it. And I'm using this as a vehicle to convince you essentially to take up mentorship. And if you're like a little bit afraid of it, like don't worry, like this is not about technical knowledge. You don't have to memorize how to create CloudFormation stacks or be able to explain what's inside an NTP packet from like memory. This is about experience, the experiences that you've had, how you learned and how you grew. And it's not that big of a responsibility, really, because this is about steering. This is not about steering, rather. You're just pointing at ways in the road where they could go. I mean, they could still decide to do their own thing, but it's up to them. And the process is actually not just about delivering knowledge, because in the process of delivering that content or to the graduate, you learn a lot about yourself. And a lot of these practices we've actually kind of mapped into a free program for women in tech. So I think about 4 months ago, what we did was we took all those practices and put them in a GitHub repo. And this is available for anyone to pull down. If you want to run this in your org, just pull it down. There's instructions on how to set up the environment and everything. Happy to help you out as well. We're running the next one in July. But essentially what this is just from start to finish, how to think about an easy-to-instance what is virtualization. And at the very end of the day, they have a semi-understanding of auto-scaling groups and why infrastructure as code is actually important. And it was a fun day, really. It wasn't just developers either. We had BAs and DLs, and a couple of them have actually transitioned jobs, which I'm super happy about. But at the end of this, I'd just like to underscore that question again. Why not give mentorship a try? It's not going to be easy. A lot of it is going to be difficult. But I'm going to promise you, right now, that it's going to be worth it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Maybe just a couple of questions.
Sure.
How big is your team at REA?
Which team?
The DevOps team.
Oh, the DevOps team. There's no specific DevOps team. So my team is a central infrastructure team with about 6 people. So, yeah.
Have you had any experience with offshore teams, and how do you train them?
Yeah, actually. So we constructed from the things that we learned about the graduate program, we constructed an internal training for developers as well, QAs, anyone who's interested in it, and it gets ported over to all the other teams offshore that we're working with. So.
And do you have is it a virtual training where they train themselves, or do you actually go to them and train them? How does that work?
Yeah, the physicality of being there and actually sitting with someone is actually highly important. So it's the difference between collaborating with someone over Git over miles away and actually pairing in that same desk. You get a lot more results with the latter.
And which offshore teams have you worked with? Any particular countries?
Yeah, so Malaysia and China so far. So yeah, and probably a couple in Thailand in 2 weeks.
And what about your thoughts? I'm interested in when you train the DevOps guys, do you focus more on the business, on them understanding what the business, how do they fit into the business, or do you focus more on their technical skills?
So so not DevOps girls, the DevOps grads. Oh yeah, definitely. I think a good way to illustrate it is we don't really want them to memorize how to do certain things as much as we want them to be asking lots of difficult questions. And I think sort of once you get started on getting them used to the idea of asking why, everything kind of crops up from there.
Yeah, thank you. And you spoke about one form of training of pairing. What are your thoughts on bringing kids into the office and pairing up with them?
We're actually starting to experiment with that. So I don't have kids, so I don't understand it that well yet. But we're still sort of exploring what the upper bound limits is as far as what kind of information we can deliver. But probably would help if I had children. So
can't help you with that.